Hello and welcome to the Concert Hall in Stockholm, where this year's Nobel Laureates received their awards from the King of Sweden for their outstanding contributions to science and economics. And they join a small and elite group, and this is the first time that they will be appearing together on TV. And we've also invited their family and friends to our audience, as well as some of the best and brightest students from across Stockholm, and they will be putting their questions and comments to our laureates. Well, this year we have discoveries in the development of small machines, 1,000 times thinner than a strand of hair. Can you believe that? We also delve into strange forms of matter that could lead to superfast computing. And does it make economic sense to pay bosses big checks, salaries, bonuses, that kind of thing? Well, they're amongst the topics that we'll be discussing with this year's Nobel Laureates. Gentlemen, welcome to you all and renewed congratulations to all of you. Now, I hope you don't mind my starting off by saying that the average age of this year's laureates is 72. You're all 65 or over. And, you know, the trend is to award the Nobel Prizes later in life. Do you think it's a good thing that you should wait longer to be recognised for your work? I'll ask you first, Oliver Hart, because your father died at the age of 106 and he published his most significant scientific paper when he was 71.
It's true, yes. I think he was going a little too slowly, actually. But to answer your question, I think certainly in economics, they tend to want to be sure that the contribution that they're recognizing is one that's going to survive the test of time. And I can understand that, because things happen, you know, people get very excited about things. There's some sort of hot topic, and then it turns out, you know, 5, 10 years later, it doesn't seem so important. So I think, you know, they often wait 30 years, and that's okay. And that's going to lead to the kind of ages you're talking about at which people win prizes.
I mean, could one of the reasons be that there's so much theory now? I mean, apparently 100 years ago, there were 1,000 physicists, and now there are apparently 1 million. So what do the physicists think? Do you think it takes longer for real talent to shine through because there's just so much information you've got to assimilate?
I don't think it takes longer. It's just, as you say, it's a matter of quantity. There are so many smart physicists around that how do you tell which piece of work is going to be significant? It's impossible.
Bennifer Inga, as a chemist, do you think that the prize acknowledges the kind of benefits of incrementalism, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants, as it were, and it kind of goes against the sudden eureka moment in the bath that we often associate with scientists?
Of course, we stand on the shoulders of giants. I mean, we work with the knowledge that was made, experienced and developed before us. But there are these sudden moments that in time that my colleagues and myself and others in the field experience, where you suddenly realize that you have made a breakthrough and that opens up a new field. It might take several years before it's recognized that a new field has been opened.
But JeanPierre Sauvage, I mean, you're a chemist, but I could ask you this when we're thinking about drugs and vaccines and that kind of thing. I mean, we do need fast science, don't we, to fix urgent problems, I mean, like the Zika virus or whatever, because, you know, you can't hang around for ages waiting for vaccines.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But, you know, we are, I think, probably all of us around this table, basic scientists. We are mostly interested in basic science. And, of course, I mean, the research we do could lead to new drugs, new vaccines, and all that. But in our everyday research, we are quite far away from that.
Let me just see what the students in our audience think. Students, just a few comments from some of you about sort of life in the fast lane, the slow lane? Because, I mean, the world that you inhabit today is quite different from when these Nobel laureates started studying. I mean, you've got, you know, instant knowledge and information. People talk about information overload, the distractions, the constant digital stimulation, you know, confusing information with knowledge. Who feels that perhaps we should have more emphasis on long-term effort and experience?
I think that maybe in recent years, technology may have affected like the young generation negatively in that sense. Maybe they have gotten less patience, perhaps, when conducting research. I don't know, but...
So your attention span might not be as good as it might be because of the constant bombardment.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any more comments?
Well, I think when these gentlemen probably started out, they had only a couple of journals, hard copy. Whereas we have basically the entire internet. So I think you just have to have a better filter. But still, great breakthroughs, as you mentioned, don't come around like every other week. That doesn't happen.
I think nowadays you have often the impression that you have so many options and alternatives that it might be a bit hard to focus on one specific goal.
I do think that one of the most important challenges for the educational system nowadays is to teach students how to select information that they can find on the internet. And in that sense, it's very important to be able to use the media as an opportunity rather than a threat.
Well, Sir Fraser, there does seem to be a bit of a kind of generational divide, I think, on how people approach their work today and how you all did.
Yes, I don't think it's as dramatic as has been described, because we were not faced with 2 journals, but many journals. And we were faced with having to read these journals rather than to access them quickly. We had to go to libraries. It was much more time-consuming than it is today. You can get information much more quickly today.
Which is good, then, you think, that you don't waste time going to the library and that kind of thing. Bengt Holmstrom, as an economist, what's your view?
I don't think we think very much about Nobel Prizes when we do our research. So I think the key issue is the nature of research and how it's evolving. So it gets to the issue about has it sped up or something like that. And in economics, at least, despite all the journals, it turns out that it's harder and takes longer to get publications. But maybe the whole function of publications has changed.
Professor
Well, to some extent, the internet started with physicists circulating their papers at CERN. So now there's a huge overload of papers coming in. In our branch of physics, everything is put on the archive almost immediately. And of course, it used to be easy to read what was put out every day or every month, but now there's so much coming in, again, you get down to this filtering problem.
It facilitates our work, no doubt. But I missed something. Which is to read an article by accident. 40 years ago, I used to browse, and to take a journal, just browse, and all of a sudden, you find a nice drawing, you read the paper, you read it more in detail, and this is totally accidental, and it's a good accident. Nowadays, you read what you are prepared to read. You go to a journal on the internet, and you will just look at what you want to look at. There are no accidents anymore.
So no, serendipity isn't
yeah,
always there.
Yeah,
OK,
sure.
Thank you. Well, some interesting thoughts there. But let's now take some of our first questions from the audience. And Rebecca Lodin, your question, please.
So I remember when I was supposed to choose a degree for university, that basic science was not a very popular field to go into among the students in my class. So how do you think we could encourage more young people to be interested in and wanting to pursue a career in basic science?
Anna Petsova.
Recent studies and surveys show that nowadays young scientists are under extremely high pressure to publish, to secure funding and tenure track positions. And this often leaves very little energy and time to do high-quality research and to pursue interesting ideas. So what is your perspective on this?
And Yuan Pan.
My question is, what is your opinion towards a global trend of reducing funding for fundamental science research?
Thank you very much. Let's take that last question first from UN Pan about the global trend. He says reduced funding for fundamental scientific research. So Fraser, I mean, do you see a difference in the research for fundamental and applied scientific research?
No, I don't. I think there is no difference between fundamental research and applied research. I think there's only good research. And I think the two merge into each other very nicely. I spent time in industry and did some very fundamental work when I was with Imperial Chemical Industries Corporate Laboratory. And that is where most of the ideas that led to my discoveries in the early 90s came from. So I've never seen this them and us situation. I've just seen good research and maybe not so good research.
Gentlemen, who'd like to pick up some of those points that we heard?
People talk a lot about the pressure to get tenure. I mean, that you have to do a lot to get tenure, and that makes people write a lot and all that. But actually, if you, when I look around and see my colleagues who've got tenure, many of them also seem to continue to produce many papers, and I think the reason they do it, so they don't they're not under the gun anymore, but they still do it. It's not just to get grants, it's because I think to some extent they like to feel busy, and they like to be able to tell people what they're doing, and actually it's quite difficult to be engaged in a long-term project, because then, you know, when you meet someone, they say, what are you up to? Well, not much, you know, nothing working out.
Complacency doesn't set in once they got the tenure, put their feet up?
No. But the thing is, I think that you would hope they would then say, oh, I'm now free to do a 10-year project. But I think it's mentally difficult to do that.
I always give my students that want to go into an academic career the following advice. Walk on 2 feet. One, going a line of research, but at least you get some decent papers so that you can write a grant application or people recognize that you do some decent work. And then work also on some very challenging question where you might not have a paper in the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, but where you will make a name in the world for yourself. Of course, that's risky, but that will set the stage maybe for your next career. So yeah, you cannot deny that there is a pressure to publish some papers, because without papers you might not have the possibility to get a grant on the next step or tenure or so. But you should focus on what are important questions, because we forget that sometimes, that the main purpose of science is to ask the right questions. So about all this information and knowledge, it's great to know a lot, but it's better to ask the right questions.
Mm-hmm. Professor Kostelitz, one question was, how do we encourage more young people to go into science?
I think that's a very difficult thing to do, because if you think about it for a minute, most people who go into science, okay, they go in very enthusiastic, study hard, etc., but the chances of being very successful are actually low. And so you're never going to get rich, for example, maybe chemistry, medicine, and so on is different, but certainly in physics, you'll never get rich doing it. So,
well, I don't know, you've got your prize now that you're sharing. Well, only if you reach the very top.
No, but actually, yeah, it's wonderful to have this prize, but if you think about its monetary value is not much, not after the taxman has had his cut. So, no, money's not the thing. It's more the satisfaction of doing, of producing something in physics. But how do you know which piece of information is significant and which is not? So, I mean, 99.9% of the stuff out there is not significant. It's just noise. And the 0.1% that is significant out there, you've got to know it's significant. How do you know it's significant? You have to be familiar with the subject. So it's a very difficult problem.
You obviously have identified that 0.1%.
I think that one of the things that's overlooked in this conversation is that mentoring is very important. It's and when you ask, you know, how can we improve on the system, I think if we maintain a good mentoring system, that is critical. And I don't think these other things changes that much. It came through from your comment about you know, giving advice to students. So I have been I would say I've been very lucky to have wonderful mentors, one of which sits in the audience here, having good colleagues and so on. And I think looking at it as a monetary issue or career concern issue is just far too narrow.
Who's your mentor here?
Bob Wilson is sitting in the corner there.
All right, put your hand up, Bob. Yeah.
He's not just my mentor, he's a mentor of many, many fine students and 2 Nobel Prize winners.
He looks very young to be a mentor, but anyway, there we are. Thank you. Our next question, please, from Kirsten Coupland.
Recently, it seems as though governments and the general public are rejecting experts and ignoring their advice, where in the past it was held in much higher esteem. What do you think is driving this trend?
Bengt Holmstrom, you worried about experts' advice being rejected by public opinion?
I'm worried about the public rejecting the not just the experts, but the sort of representatives, and that have the ability or should have the ability to process complex information. And today's situation seems to be characterized by people thinking that they can go directly to the source and not have anybody interpret it, and therefore they are very much subject to misunderstanding what is going on. And so, yes, I'm worried.
Is that not a bit elitist, though, that complex issues have to be understood by the experts and ordinary people are not capable of working it out themselves?
Yes, but elitist doesn't mean in this context that it needs to be bad. So, you know, this is really part of our democratic system, that there are some people who know more than the others, and not necessarily because they are smarter or anything like that, but they have just been handed the task to process the information on a broader basis. And what seems to be happening now is a sort of total, almost rejection for this principle.
You know, I think some of the, I don't want to call it distrust of experts, but sort of working around them isn't so bad. I mean, for example, you know, once upon a time, if there was anything wrong with you, you went to the doctor and you assumed that what the doctor was telling you was the truth. Now you can go on the internet and find out, get a lot of information about what might be wrong with you. And I think that can be actually productive. Sometimes you can end up knowing more than the doctor about a particular thing, or at least being able to bring to their attention something. I think there's a difference between that and you know, if you go on the web and you look at things carefully, and you might even read some journal articles, you don't want to exaggerate your competence to understand them, but you can get a sense of it. I mean, that's a good thing. And if you did that, say, with global warming, you would undoubtedly end up with the conclusion that the science says this is a really serious problem. What's worrying is when people find somebody who says it's not a problem and focuses, you know, they then focus on that.
Yeah, this whole tsunami of information, the real point that we are all facing is, of course, quality of information. What does it mean? How are we going to educate our young people to distinguish what is right? How are we to make the information available to the general public? And probably we as scientists have to do a much better job to distinguish facts from fiction and opinions. You cannot develop a smartphone based on an opinion.
So Fraser, I mean, specifically on the Brexit vote and, you know, experts and politicians seeing their advice rejected, that caused you a great deal of angst. Why?
It did. If we're going to enter an era of hard Brexit, then this is almost like a chemical reaction that is close to irreversible. And that saddens me. I was at the forefront, I feel, when I was in the UK and Sheffield and Lutterley and Birmingham, bringing in students from all over Europe and then all around the world. When I left to go to the United States, we were something in the excess of 15 different nationalities in a group of 30 to 40 people. This was sheer magic. This switched on the students from the British Isles in a remarkable way, as well as, you know, really raise the standard of our research. And so I'm saddened by the fact that the people working in chemistry at the highest level in the UK could be faced in the near time by having to go down to pulling on a population of 65 million instead of 500 million.
Kirsten, were you happy with what you heard? I mean, what's the answer to your own question?
Oh, I suppose, I mean, for me, doing my PhD has been invaluable in allowing me to consider how the scientific process happens, how to approach something as a skeptic and to look at the evidence. And I think, I feel like that's something that's missing perhaps in the general public's mindset. They tend to take what the media gives them and ingest that rather than perhaps being as critical as it should be. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so we'll go to your specific fields now, gentlemen, for which you won the prize, and let us start with economics. Professor Hart and Professor Holmstrom, the Nobel Committee said you won the prize for your separate work on contract theory. The judges said your work laid an intellectual foundation for policies in areas such as whether workers should receive a bonus, incentive or ordinary salary, whether essential public services should be privatized, and they said these were matters valuable to the understanding of real-life contracts and institutions. Oliver Hart, you see parallels between your work on incomplete contracts, what I could term bad contracts, and why people in the UK voted Brexit. How does your work on contract theory explain the Brexit vote?
Well, I don't want to say it explains it, but there are parallels because in my work I've looked at contracts between two commercial parties, and I've argued that in situations where it's hard to write a good contract, what becomes very important is who gets to decide on the things missing from the contract. I call that residual control rights, and that sometimes goes together with ownership of assets. Now, in the political context, if we take, you can think of the European Union, the arrangement that all the countries have in the European Union. It's like a contract, and you could imagine in a sort of ideal world that everything would be written down in advance, and then the whole European Union would just have been about the negotiation of that initial contract. Well, of course, you can't do that. So instead, you set up these decision-making bodies, and I think that what British voters felt was they'd allocated a lot of that power, that residual authority, to the centre, Brussels, let's call it, away from the individual countries. And I think people perhaps felt they had done too much of that. By the way, I was in favour of Remain. I didn't vote.
So just very quickly, on this issue of Brexit, were you all opposed to it, including the two Europeans, Dutch and French? Were you all opposed to Brexit?
Yes.
You all were. Interesting. All our Nobel laureates at the table, 4 of you British, 2 European, say you're all opposed to Brexit. OK, Bengt Holmstrom, your research looked at whether contract incentives, how contract incentives affect corporate behaviour and, whether performance-related pay works and the difficulties in assessing, say, a teacher's performance, as you said. It's not as easy to measure as, say, a factory worker and how many goods or handbags or whatever they may have manufactured. So in terms of the workplace, what does your research into contract theory tell us?
I think the big insight, in some sense, in my view, is that we were very focused initially on thinking that incentives need to be provided by financial instruments of some kind or other, or a contract. And we have come to understand how big a part of incentives is actually something entirely different than what most people think as incentives, like bonuses or something like that. So
throwing money at people doesn't necessarily deliver.
It's not just a matter of money, but yes, the sort of stereotype view is throwing money at people, or there's an incentive problem, let's incentivize them with some money. Actually, that is most definitely not the main approach the world takes.
Really? I ask you, when we have all these debates, particularly in the UK, about executive pay and executives getting big bonuses and salaries because share prices have gone up in their company or whatever, what's your answer to that? Does it not make economic sense to pay these big checks?
It's not so much how big they are. I mean, size matters, but what worries me much more is how they get structured, and especially what these scandals and other things have led to in terms of how they are designed. So I think we have gone from some errors that could have been corrected, say, 20 years ago or so, in the designs into much worse designs, because of the public being upset and the regulators being upset, and they are trying to really solve the problem on levels and not thinking so much about the incentives. So I think we are gone from maybe a somewhat flawed system to a much worse system.
Also, moving to another area of research that you awarded your prize for was this question of whether, for public providers of services, whether they could be privatised. For instance, the Obama administration said the prison service, which was privatised, should no longer be provided, by private companies. You also see a live debate in Africa, for instance, about whether education should be publicly provided or provided by the private sector. So, Professor Hart, I mean, what does economics tell us?
Well, I think it can be helpful. I wrote a paper with co-authors about this issue, and I think, what we say in the paper is, one extreme, would you privatize nuclear weapons? We thought, no. I mean, put them in private hands. Didn't seem like have a contract with someone who holds the nuclear weapons. Probably not a good idea. Would you privatize the State Department? Would you have a contract with a private company to run foreign policy? I don't know whether Donald Trump is thinking along those lines, but I don't think that would be a good idea. He has appointed a businessman, I think, so maybe he's moving in that direction. But at the other extreme, garbage collection, rubbish collection, quite comfortable with that. Really? It depends how good a contract you can write, and what kind of things can go wrong, and therefore who should have the residual control rights. That's how to think about these things. Right. Schools are somewhere in between. When you have competition, that strengthens the case for privatization. So in the case of schools, if a school does badly, is shading on quality, then people will eventually find out. It may take a bit of time, but, and they'll send their kids to a different school. Right. In the case of prisons, we probably don't think it would be a great idea for the prisoners to be able to shop around. And so, their competition isn't going to work as well. And that strengthens the case for public provision.
Thank you very much. So let us turn to chemistry and the you chemistry laureates. The three of you were jointly awarded the prize for fundamental chemistry. The Nobel Committee said you have mastered motion control at the molecular scale, the design and synthesis of machines 1,000 times thinner than a strand of hair, so small that tens of thousands of them could actually fit on a pinhead. So we've got some questions, I think, from the students here. If I could have the first one, Olof Jonsson, your question.
Yeah. So what are the fundamental limits to how small you could make these artificial molecular machines?
Okay, great. If we could take the next one, Hilda Bergman.
So I wonder, in 20 years' time, where do you think you'll see the biggest use of molecular robots? Would it, for example, be in medicine or molecular electronics?
Thank you. Bennifer Inga, let me take the first one with you. What are the fundamental limits to how small you can make an artificial molecular machine? Because in 1999, you led the first research to produce a molecular motor that continually spins in the same direction. And then in 2011, your group built a four-wheel drive nano car.
Yeah, it's very difficult to say what the limits would be, but we work with molecules, and typically our molecular motor is 0.5 nanometer or so, and 1 nanometer is 1 billionth of a meter, as you know. So the limits will be probably in that size, but you have to realize if you want to build machines, it's only, the moving part is only part of the machine. So you have to integrate it. For instance, you have to put it on a surface or integrate in a device, etc. So that all depends upon the type of molecules you are designing for a specific purpose. If you look in your eye, which has a beautiful switch, it is the tiny molecule in the eye is probably 1 nanometer, but it's part of a big protein complex that makes it possible that the signal of the light that comes to your eye triggers this in your eye and then changes, and there's a cascade of processes that make it possible that you get the signal in your brain. The fact that I can see you and you can see me, the fact that our cells can divide, that we can move our muscles, these are machines of a couple of nanometers at most.
JeanPierre Sauvage, I mean, you managed to make one molecule pirouette around the other in a controlled manner when energy was applied. So our question about where do you see the biggest use for molecular robots in medicine or molecular electronics? The question was, what's your answer?
To make it clear, I have no answer. I have comments, you know. Before our contributions, it was considered as extremely difficult to set molecular systems in motion. I mean, everybody knew that there were plenty of such motors and machines in the biological world, but using artificial systems, molecules which had been made in a laboratory, that was considered almost impossible. And I think that was a big step, in a way, that the three of us and our co-workers.
But just the questioner, I assume, is thinking, won't he?
Yeah.
But when she asked about medicine, is that, you know, we think about the walking microscopic robots, which could, for instance, slip inside the human body and deliver drugs in a targeted manner.
Yeah, perhaps.
Perhaps. Sir Fraser, the question we had about do you foresee any negative social or environmental challenges with the misuse of this technology that we should be aware of? And I should say that you made a key advance by threading a molecular ring onto a rod-like structure that acted as a dumbbell, the kind of thing we use in a gym. When you added the two together, the ring jumped forwards and backwards like a tiny shuttle, and later you built numerous molecular machines, including a pump. So that was your particular contribution. But what's your answer to the questions?
Well, if I could take the latter part first and just make a comment about the movement, whereas Bennifer Inga has promoted the movement in a circular sense, a rotary sense. I think JeanPierre and I, with our rotaxane-based systems, molecular shuttle-based systems, have done the fundamental preliminary work to achieve movement in a linear direction. But it's not just sufficient to have that movement in a willy-nilly type of way. We have got to be able to direct that movement. And the first step after you have the willy-nilly type of movement is to go to a switch. There's still a lot to be done in terms of going from switches to machines. Machines have to do work. And this has been a progressive situation from finding how to bring about this motion in either a rotary or a linear direction to a switch, to a machine.
Would you like to see opportunities in the discoveries you've made? Would you like to see them develop? I mean, Bennifer Inga, do you see great opportunities in?
Yes, I definitely see great opportunities. And as my colleagues already said, it is very, very early days. So this is fundamental research. The breakthrough that you can induce motion, responsive functions in materials, opens up an entirely new field of material science and machines, ultimately maybe science fiction at this moment. But in 30, 40, 50 years from now, I see many opportunities. During my whole career, I worked together with industry also on potential applications. And so we have close contact there. And this counts for the whole community, I think, if we see opportunities for cooperation, we will work together with industries. But you have to realize to bring it to a product in the market might take a long development trajectory. Develop a new medicine at this moment takes more than 12 years and lots of money. So this is typically the time frame we are working in.
It turns out in my laboratory in recent times, by working in this area, we have serendipitously gone off in two completely different directions. One is to create very highly porous materials that has the basis for one startup company starting about 15 months ago that is looking at use of these porous materials in home care, in personal care, in food, and ultimately in pharmaceuticals. And the other one is a quite serendipitous discovery that I would never have even predicted, and that is that we are looking at new ways of isolating gold that get us away from the use of cyanide, which is 83% of the world's isolation, and the other 17% is mercury. Two very nasty chemicals. And all of this has come out of fundamental research, and both of these are serendipitous discoveries going on while we're making molecular machines.
Thank you. All right, thank you very much indeed, Chemist Laureates. I turn to the laureates in physics, Duncan Haldane, Michael Kostelitz, and also David Thowless, all of you British-born, and David Thowless, Professor Thowless is not with us, but our congratulations go to him also. You were jointly awarded the prize for discoveries for your pioneering work on strange forms of matter. The Nobel Committee said your discoveries had opened the door on an unknown world. Now, Michael Kostelitz, along with David Thowless, you focus on phenomena that arise in flat forms of matter on surfaces inside extremely thin layers that can be considered two-dimensional, unlike the three dimensions that we describe reality around us with. And the work involves a field of maths known as topology. Topology basically, I suppose, analyzes the shape of things. It tells us that a donut and a wedding ring topologically are the same thing. And you, Duncan Haldane, studied one-dimensional matter. So that's a kind of preface to the question that we have from our physics student, Flore Kunst. Flore.
Do you think there will be any technological advancements, such as, for instance, quantum computers, coming from the new insights in quantum mechanics that were provided by Jordi's?
Most probably, yes. I mean, what we really discovered was that there were more interesting materials than we expected. And condensed matter physics is a fancy name for understanding the properties of materials. And what this work has really led to, it started off with one-dimensional things, but it's not just one-dimensional or two-dimensional. There are a class of materials which we didn't realize existed before that have very interesting properties in their quantum mechanical structure. And the quantum mechanics is the fundamental way to understand all materials. And the topology is a side issue in the sense that we discovered some very beautiful, unexpected properties of quantum mechanics, and the mathematical tools of topology turned out to be very useful for analyzing the specific differences between these unexpected forms of matter and conventional matter. So this whole analog about pretzels and bagels is just that the bagel has a hole in it, and it's different from a football which doesn't, and this new form of new kinds of condensed matter are also different from the familiar types as the bagel is from the football. The property of having the hole in the bagel makes it slightly different. You can, pick up the bagel and you can look through it, you can poke your finger through it or whatever, but it's just different.
But it's not good for playing football with.
No, it's not good for playing football, but it will change the game, as I said.
Right, so Professor Kostelitz, we have heard that your work could result in improved materials for electronics, and that could lead to superfast computers.
Okay, no, this is...
Doesn't like the question.
No, it's not that I don't like it. I'm just fumbling for an answer to that, because let me stress that when we started this work, we had no thoughts about applications or anything like that. It was nothing more than an interesting theoretical problem. There was a theoretical question that we wanted to try to answer, and that's what started it all.
Sure. But could it? I mean, in theory.
One can see all the difficulties as well as some of the possibilities, and the question was asking about the possibilities. Duncan and I can see many of the difficulties, unanswered difficulties, right? And so we simply don't know the answer to the question.
Well, we'll leave the physics there then. Could we go to our next question, please? Ingela Lenkoff.
Hi. So we've all noticed that there are no women that received the Nobel Prize this year. So my question is, what can you as Nobel laureates, us as young scientists, but also general public, do to encourage women to go into science and promote them?
Well, I'll volunteer to start that one. See, my own view of this issue, it is an issue, no question about it, but my own view of this issue is a bit heretical. And you see, to me, the female of the species is actually too smart to go into physics. Simply because physics is a tough education, no question about it. And the resulting job you're going to get with this fancy education is not great. It doesn't pay particularly well, and it doesn't give you much free time. So why on earth should somebody who is sensible and intelligent go into this difficult field when they can make a much better living in easier fields?
It's so heretical that your fellow laureate is disagreeing, shaking your head.
I said that my view is heretical,
Physics
but I thought
is a fantastic job because it gives you the opportunity to discover things and to work on advancing knowledge. Now, if you want to, it's not badly paid. I disagree that it's badly paid. It's not, I mean, people that, if you want to make huge amounts of money, of course you go to Wall Street or whatever, but the issue with women in physics, I mean, physics departments, certainly in the United States, are very tremendously focused on trying to do something about this. We believe probably it's a question of maybe it's role models to be able to see successful women scientists, and so people believe that they can have a career in it. We really do wish women to come into physics, and there's a problem of women becoming discouraged and dropping out at each stage of the process.
There is an experiment that they have done in auditions of musicians, and they have started to audition behind the curtain. It changes dramatically the number of women that were accepted. So it just shows that there is a lot of discrimination. Right. And it's not an evil discrimination. I think it's just subconscious. We are a club. You know, we men behave in a certain way. We understand each other better. We don't understand women very well. You know.
So Fraser, your late wife was a scientist.
Yes.
As are your two daughters.
Yes.
What's your answer on this gender issue? Why does it happen that we don't have enough women? And what can you do about it?
Well, I think it's a changing environment, and I think we will see over the next 50 years a dramatic change. If I express it in terms of my own family, I think my two daughters who are sitting in this audience with PhDs in chemistry are living in a much different social and home background than even myself and my wife were. They are supported by husbands who are playing a big role in running the family, looking after the children. And so I think we're seeing social changes that will make it very much easier for women to participate in the furtherance of science. And so I'm very optimistic that it's going to come about. Maybe 1 year in the future there'll be 7 women sitting around this table.
Optimistic comments, and I think we can end that particular area of. I should just want to end by saying, of course, normally we would hope to be joined at the table by the Laureate for Literature, and this year, of course, it was Bob Dylan. I should also say, actually, of course, we don't have with us Professor Yoshinori Osumi, who is the Nobel Laureate in Medicine or Physiology, and our congratulations go to him too. But in terms of Bob Dylan, there have been some comments saying that a songwriter perhaps shouldn't have been considered in this category of literature prize. JeanPierre, you reacted there, so what do you think?
I like him as a singer, I like the music, but I also have difficulties to believe that there are no writers, you know, very recognized writers who wouldn't deserve the prize as well.
All right, very diplomatic answer, perhaps, saying that. Anybody else? Bob Dylan, Ben?
I think it's fantastic that Bob Dylan got this award. I mean, his poems, his songs were so important and influential for a whole generation. You know, when I was a student, I had these records, and I still know every one of it. It's great. And when it was announced, in a typical laboratory like mine, every laboratory has its own music, and within a minute, they all switched to Bob Dylan.
Really? He said he was rendered speechless when he received news that he'd been awarded the Nobel Prize.
His words influence people, you know. It seems to me that's literature.
Okay, good choice. Professor Kostelitz, I think you're a big fan, aren't you?
From a personal point of view, when I heard that the Literature Prize had been awarded to Bob Dylan, I thought, wow, that's the greatest decision I've ever heard of. It was wonderful.
Why?
I love Dylan and his music and songs. I essentially grew up with it.
Do you do karaoke for Bob Dylan's songs?
I once tried it. I mean, I can't sing.
You don't want to give us a burst here?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I can't sing.
I have something heretical to say about Bob Dylan, which is I think we spent far too much time talking about Bob Dylan.
Well,
I don't mean here.
Oh, right, yeah.
I mean just generally, you know. Is he coming? Isn't he coming? I actually don't care. I mean, he didn't come. I mean, it seems to me, it may have been a fine choice, but probably if he had come, he would have sucked all the oxygen out of the event. So it's partly, I think, good thing he didn't.
Well, I shall take up your recommendation and stop talking about Bob Dylan now. And in fact, gentlemen, we will stop talking about anything because that's the end of this programme. Thank you to all you laureates and renewed congratulations. Thank you to our audience here at the Concert Hall in Stockholm, and thank you to you, of course, wherever you are in the world watching this programme. From me, Zeinab Badawi, and the rest of the team on Nobel Minds, goodbye.